Right, so in this video I'm going to be showing you how to rotate objects in perspective. Now really what I'm going to be showing you is how to rotate a plane, but once you get that you can do more advanced objects like this cube. Now I'll show you how to do that at the end, and for that I highly suggest you watch my previous two videos, how to draw perfect squares and how to draw perfect cubes. For just rotating the planes, all you need to know is how to draw perfect squares. Right, so the way most books teach this is kind of infuriating to me. They'll tell you to draw a shape, and then if you want to rotate it, you just pick a different perspective point, and then they'll either wrongly tell you to draw a horizontal line parallel to the horizon line, or they'll tell you correctly, kind of, to guess the other two sides. Now, with practice, of course, this can end up looking accurate, but what kind of infuriates me is that they don't cover the technical way to do this. So if you want to double check what you're drawing, there's just no way to do it. Also, if you wanted to rotate all the objects the same amount, you don't know where the other perspective point is, and you don't have any way to find this out. So it's kind of impossible, and you have to do it all by feeling. And that's kind of where my method comes in. I wouldn't expect anybody to use it that much, just like I talked about in my earlier videos. It's more like a definitive way to check whatever you're drawing. Now, the secret to rotating a plane is that when it rotates, it forms a circle, and it doesn't matter if the plane is a square or if it's a rectangle. I used a rectangle here to show you. It still forms a circle. Now, we're really interested in two of these circles. First is the inner circle along the shortest width. So, it's that circle that you see right in the middle. The second circle is the one formed by the longest width. And the third circle is the one that is formed by the corners, which is technically the most accurate, but it's also the hardest to draw. By hand, it's nearly impossible because we have no guides. With the second circle, you can draw that square quite easily and just use that. So now that we understand all that, how do we actually do it? Well, first I'm going to start out with just making any shape. I'm going to use a rectangle just because it's actually harder than a cube because of the varying widths. So here's our rectangle, and I'm going to find the center point, and we're also going to want to divide it in half along both ways. Now things here get a little bit confusing, so I'm going to highlight with points the intersections that I'm actually interested in, and hopefully that'll help you follow along with what I'm doing. Now what we're going to do is we're going to rotate the object 90 degrees to find that square. With an actual square, this isn't necessary. But for this, I'm using the midpoint in the horizon line, and I passed it through the midpoint of our rectangle along the back. And this is going to give us all the necessary points to draw the square in the middle. And then this square is going to be our guide for the inner circle. This next line didn't actually need to be drawn, but I did it because out of convenience I didn't want the middle to just be a jumble of unintelligible lines. Right, so now I'm going to draw the inner circle, and to do that I'm going to use the ellipse tool in Photoshop. By hand this is the most difficult part because you kind of have to eye it. And there can be some inconsistencies. Even here in this example that I filmed, this isn't actually the most accurate way to use ellipses. For one object, it works really well though. Even for a couple, it'll probably work. But if you want to do an animation, I suggest you do the more advanced method that I show when I do the cube, where I use cross sections on the ellipse to put it perfectly into perspective so that there won't be any errors. But for now, this is good enough. So we have that done, and now I'm just kind of extracting the necessary lines, like the important lines, because it is a bit messy. So here I'm grabbing the midline, and this is going to help us rotate the length of the rectangle. Then I can mark the midpoint, and using that we can find out the other two corners and form our square. Once that's done, we can connect the points to our other perspective point and finish our square. So from this we can place our ellipses. Now, as I talked about before, this is the second circle, and this makes it slightly harder to rotate things, but it is easier to draw. By hand, you wouldn't be able to draw the ellipse that goes around the corners. It's only really possible in Photoshop, as I show with the cube at the end. So here I'm fitting the ellipses, and again, I was doing this kind of wrong because I'm just randomly transforming it. There's kind of a proper way to transform it in perspective, but it's still decently accurate. So once that is done, and it can take a while to get it right, after some practice, the speed will improve. But once that's done, we already have the shape rotated 90 degrees. So here, as you can see, I am outlining it. And here you can see what makes it so hard about drawing the sides when you're using the second circle method. And that's because, as you can see right there, the line has to be tangent to the circle. And normally you wouldn't have those red lines to guide you. This is just the case because we rotated it 90 degrees, but any other angle and you wouldn't have that, and that's really hard to do by eye. In contrast, if you were able to use that third circle that goes around the corners, then in that case you have 2 points that you can just connect. And you'll see this more clearly in a second when I just choose a random vanishing point. So to do it from a random point, basically you pick a random point, and then you draw that line and make it touch the inner circle. So you draw 2 lines that touch the inner circle. These are the sides. And then I draw a third one that crosses the middle, so we'll know where the line needs to be tangent to. Now this might take a few tries, but eventually you'll get something that looks okay. So I'm kind of testing the line there, and again here in the back, and usually the back is where you go wrong because the lines are so dense. This is much easier to do if you work on a really large canvas. Now, finally, you might have noticed that I didn't say anything about 1 or 2 point perspective, and that's because you can use this to rotate a shape from 1 point to 2 point and from 2 point to 1 point. So here, I'm just going to grab that midpoint, and that's going to be my 1 point perspective, basically. And then we can just draw a line touching that point right there horizontally, and that'll be our shape transformed into 1 point perspective. And now on to the more advanced stuff, which is drawing the animated cube. For this, I highly recommend that you get a really big canvas if you want to try it, and get really small lines, because just a line that's like a millimeter off just really makes a difference. You can see it here in the first time I tried it. The square is kind of wobbling about, and that's because I was using a low resolution canvas, and also I was using the old ellipse method that I just showed you. The newer one is much better. Now we start off with the guides that I discussed in the second video on how to draw perfect cubes, and I'm drawing the cube in the middle just because it's easier. I'm going to flip the frames later so I don't have to draw as much. Now initially I did a cube here at the bottom, but it's going to be really hard to do that top ellipse. It's much easier to do this if the square is kind of at an extreme angle, so that both ellipses are easy to see. Even then, it's a bit hard. Now here you can see I'm using an ellipse that's more transformed to perspective. but then halfway through I kind of realized if I made an ellipse and then I drew lines like this, I could use those to perfectly guide me to put it on the corners right there. So the outer circle needs to be rotated 45 degrees, so you can use the mid lines along the bottom square and the top square. So those are our guides for the bottom, and then to get our height for all the rotated cubes, we just repeat that at the top. To transform it like that, I think you press Control Alt Shift, or there, if you right click, there's a perspective option. Um, and that's how you do it. The lines might be a bit hard to see. You might want to select those, extend the selection, and then fill it to make them thicker. But I was able to see it because the canvas was at such a high resolution. And then basically I just keep picking points and drawing out the lines like I did for the planes, except we have two planes here. And then I found it's easier to just pick either the top or the bottom plane, where the intersection is most like a cross, so that'll be the most accurate one, and kind of draw the sides down. And then once you have all four corners, all four edges, you can draw in the sides, and that's a bit more accurate. Now, once I have all these drawings, I get rid of all my guides, and I trace them each with a thicker line and then a low opacity one for the hidden edges, but I still did them so you could see them. And then just basically you trace all that, and when you're done, you put all the layers in a timeline, and you can choose your animation and export it and do whatever you want from there. I'm not going to show that because that would be an entire video. Now, once you're done tracing all the squares, there's something interesting you can do. If you turn on all the layers and stack them all up, you'll be able to see the ellipses that we used as our guides, and I think this helps better illustrate how they help turn the cube. Anyways, that's the final animation. There it is. Anyways, if you found the video helpful, please consider subscribing, and if you want to support me, share the video or check out my Patreon. For this video specifically, there's a bunch of Patreon only goodies, including the PSD for the cube and all the 3D models I've used in the last couple of perspective videos.